You're gonna love it. All right, if you're having trouble hearing in the back, just let us know. Should work out all right. This is legit serious business here. I feel like we're getting almost literary. So, obviously, you're here because you know who this is. I don't need to give you the full rundown.
Well, we go way back.
We go way back, 20 years? 15
I think
years.
15 years,
15 years, 15 years. So, but, if anybody just, fell off the back of the truck in front of the diner yesterday, Megan Abbott is the award-winning author of 11 novels, right? Queen Pin, Dare Me, and Beware the Woman. Outstanding, by the way, if you haven't read it yet. She's also worked in film and TV. She was on HBO's The Deuce, worked on HBO The Deuce, and produced and created Dare Me for USA. Kind of a big deal. And you got something in the works right now with Beware the Woman, yeah? A film adaptation, right? Outstanding. Oh, comics. Let's not forget comics. Normandy Gold, right? Just a well-rounded, kind of the Ida Lupino of,
Highest compliment.
she's a slash. She's got all these tentacles in everybody's business. So, did we go there already? I haven't even had a chance to read my little. Come on, I wrote it especially for you guys. So here we go. Megan's work invites readers into the secret lives of women and girls and explores the ways in which their bodies can become battlegrounds. While she started off examining women's experiences through the lens of historical, hard-boiled crime fiction, her work has evolved into a kind of genre-defying suburban body horror, but without the supernatural element to cushion the raw, ugly, and often painfully familiar truth. So that's
Nicely put. Thank you.
You bet. All right, so let's start with Beware the Woman. That's your latest, right? I don't understand how the synchronicity happened, but somehow we both wrote pregnant protagonists, and neither one of us have kids.
It's like nothing's going on in that area, though. It's like women's bodies are not being discussed at all in the culture.
No big deal, no big deal. Well, that actually brings me to one of my questions is, when you started on that book was before the demise of Roe v. Wade, and now things are a little different. Did that change the way you felt about the book in general, about what you wanted to say, or?
Well, it was certainly, I started writing that book probably 2021, so it was well in the air. It had been in the air for about 4 or 5 years by then. And, so it was certainly, I think many women were thinking about it, and men too, it was sort of, it was a moment. It was certainly an era of panic that we've all kind of been through and haven't quite exited. So it is the kind of stuff that makes you think of primal horrors, and the primal horror most is your body under attack, surveilled in some way, exposed, made vulnerable, and I think particularly for women, sort of under the medical gaze, is historically women have been ill-treated by the medical profession, and I think that was all sort of hovering my brain. But I do remember that the day I turned in the revisions was the day that the Dobbs decision, they overturned, and my editor said she just got a chill up her spine because if I had such an uncanny feeling. So it's the kind of thing it's the kind of synchronicity you don't wish for when publishing a book.
Well, it's funny because I was talking with an acquaintance about the idea of having a big arc for your career, where you start and where you end up. And, mystery writers, we like to talk about, are you a plotter or a pantser, right? But do you consider yourself to have a map for where you're going overall, book to book, or is it just more of an organic flow from whatever's caught in your net
Right. No, it is. I mean, I wish I were so thoughtful about anything. I wish I could think about that. I wish I understood how, like, what would be strategic, or, I mean, maybe I don't. I don't know. I don't think, I don't think many of us, the writers, we really think that way. I don't think you can really complete it. But it's hard to write a book, and you can't complete it if it's something that isn't in you. So I think it has to be organic. But I think often from the outside, when they look at the books, they think I was writing the historical noir, and then when I moved to present day, that was some decision. But it really wasn't. It was just because I like to try new things and sort of frightened myself, write about stuff I haven't written about, write about stuff that's more personal or something. So I'm always trying to write into the fear and hope that speaks to the person reading it, that if I'm afraid of something, then probably some other people will be too. So it really is just kind of what's on my mind. And likewise, I think, I wanted to write myself into film noir, as we both know, that feeling when I started. And often I want to write myself into various subcultures, like, cheerleading, gymnastics, the world of science, all these things, ballet, that I was sort of fascinated by. And then immediately I want to write my way out of them because they're so intense. But so it is always sort of just following my fascination. Is it that way for you too?
I think so, absolutely. And I mean, I also am really drawn by, like, what I refer to as topic crushes. Yeah.
Yes.
Where you find out about some little tiny demi-monde and you're like, oh my God, I need to know every single thing about this. I think a lot of writers, we love research. We love rabbit holes. We love, digging in and finding out about people's jobs.
It's the voyeur, where writers are always really like we have our eye to the peephole. I think that's really instinctive, and I think that's also why all of us read. We want to like peer into forbidden worlds, and I think that's the big allure.
I think so too, and I mean, I know that from the outside, if you look at it from a historical versus present day perspective, there's a lot of differences between your early work and the later, but to me, it feels like a continuum because, you start off with this traditional hard-boiled idiom, but now we're kind of like moving into this sort of Circean kind of melodrama, women's pictures, but they're not. Yes, they're not the same, but they're not that different either.
Yeah, they never feel different to me. I mean, there's still like screwed up women making bad decisions, like in every era. And I think that's the sort of common denominator. And I've always thought, like you mentioned Douglas Sirk, who's a director I adore, and some of you may know his famous melodramas of the 50s, Magnificent Obsession, All That Heaven Allows, Imitation of Life. And to me, those movies were always kissing cousins with noir, because they're really about desire and longing and feeling like a social outcast and being an other, and I think it's all really the same, and they're really all psychologically driven, and I think trying to figure people out is a lot of what you do as a writer, and I think definitely what we do as readers.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think that the trope of the messy woman is kind of having a moment right now, and for so long, female characters didn't really have a lot of options. You had, what is it? Why can't you just leave this case alone?
Yes, it's the cop's wife is always
the
like,
cop's wife or the femme fatale.
Yes,
either you could be strong, right, and not a mess, or you can be a mess and be a victim. But now it's all getting kind of mixed together. Really fascinating way. Do you consider your characters to fit into that messy woman?
Oh man, yeah. They're kind of disasters, and I always want, you're always hoping for permission to have your, it certainly is something that's talked about, certainly on the publishing level or something like Goodreads, which I never go on because often the unlikable women, which really means messy women, and I understand that. You don't really these aren't role models, but who reads for role models? Not me. I read for people really, really setting fire to their lives. I think that's so much more interesting, and I think I think it's such a relief. I remember when I first started writing about teenage girls, and there was just at that time, unless you got deep into YA, teenage girls were not considered complicated people that could have dark feelings. And if you've ever been a teenage girl or had one in your life, no one is darker than a teenage girl. No one is more troubled and dangerous. So I think, and then now that's completely accepted. I think so. I do think the culture has moved and been more
I think
embracing.
you had a lot to do with that, in the fact that you were bringing us, the audience, you kind of, like you tricked us a little, but in a good way. You got us in with the noir.
Yeah.
Come for the noir, stay for the teenage drama.
Yeah.
Because we're already on board because it's you.
Thank
and
you.
then you pull us into this whole other world. And for the longest time, I feel like women's emotions were not serious, which is why when men feel feelings, it's literature.
Right.
And when women feel feelings, it's soap opera.
Yeah. No, I mean, that's so true. I mean, this is sort of a cliche about literary fiction, but, if, like the novel about the man's midlife crisis and he has the affair with his student and his wife breaks, they would never call that a domestic novel. But if you write about women's life, somehow it's domestic as if it were like home economics or something.
It
like,
couldn't be more domestic.
It's
so domestic.
It's so strange.
But it's real and serious.
Yes.
Because it's manly man feelings and not girly girl feelings.
Yeah.
And especially not teenage girls.
No, that's right. And I think often with male characters, and this is really a slam on. This isn't a slam on any of these writers. Even I love Philip Roth novels or Tom Perrotta or any of these that write about this. But it is really the way we perceive it, because I think it's considered existential when a man has a crisis, but when a woman has a crisis, she's just messy and she's just.
It's Beverly Hills Housewives.
Yeah,
She's, going to throw a drink on somebody.
That's right.
It just isn't taken seriously,
Yes.
and that showing that secret world of, the secret lives of women and girls, that's what is so appealing and so addictive about your work.
And we always knew, those of us who love film noir, I mean, you see Bette Davis in any movie, and this is exactly who we're talking about. She's constantly, ruining people's lives and her own, and I think that was always. It's not like this is new, but at some point, and you can sort of track this historically, like Cold War America, that there needed to, like, women need to be put back at home and in the kitchen, and somehow we sort of went backwards, and then backlash against feminism, and there's been all these ways to sort of push women back, but inevitably, I think we come forward again with our problems.
Well, yeah, and I think that a lot of the writers of the noir era were kind of writing around. This was something we were talking about earlier, writing around the shape of, like the Hays Code and the things that you couldn't talk about, and a lot of the stuff that you couldn't talk about, coincidentally, has to do with women's bodies. Like abortion or. Any kind of sexuality out of wedlock, pregnancy, and being able to take that shape that was left out by writers of the earlier eras and fill it in.
Right.
That's what really has a kind of a gravitas, adds a gravitas to your work, especially in this current environment.
Yeah, well, I think, it speaks again to why we read books. And I think we're always, in some ways we're reading them for pleasure, for escape, for excitement, but we're also reading them because they some way speak to our lives, even if they're in extreme, And I think I always thought, and I know we've talked about this many times, that crime fiction is one of the places where you get to see women's real issues, violence in the home, struggles with motherhood, these desire, all this sort of stuff. It's in crime fiction that you see that, I think, more than general fiction, more than any other place, because it's allowed to be messy and people are allowed to behave like real people. And the crime is like the great hook of it all, and it gives you your story engine, but it's the characters that we read for, not the crime. I mean, even if it's the the female amateur sleuth. We're reading it for her, because we love her. I think that's really the heart of it.
Do you find that a character comes to you first in your writing? I mean, like, assuming you've fallen down the rabbit hole and you're into topic, whatever. Does the first thing that comes to you is the person who is in that? And tell me a little bit about your love of the second in command as a character.
Oh yeah, that's a deep cut. That's
like
true.
In the example of Beware the Woman. Like, does that character pull you in, or is it more story first and character second?
It's certainly character first. I mean, I may have a premise. I certainly will have a premise or a world, but if I can't get and it's not even necessarily the character, but I have to have the voice. I don't know if it's that way for you, but if I can't hear the character talking, I don't have it yet. And often I just don't have the right point of view. And I think I've often been interested in like the B girl, a different version of the B girl than we're talking about, but the lieutenant. I think that's often the most interesting person to me because they're close to power but don't have access to it, but do at a remove. So I've always liked. It's sort of like. I mean, the classic version of it, I guess, is Nick Carraway in The Great Gatsby. He's the one telling that story, but nothing happens to him, and yet it does. And so I think that's often the more interesting person. It is often the reader's surrogate. We identify with that character usually more than the maybe the wild and crazy main character. So it becomes a way into the story, a kind of slight vicarious edge. And then inevitably for me, though, that character becomes the most interesting because they're usually hiding something. No one's that. Nick Carraway, one of the tricks of The Great Gatsby is when you read it later in life, you realize that Nick has a whole romantic life that is slightly off the page. I don't know how many of you have read it later, but there's a very famous scene where when you read it as an adult, you're like, wait, in 9th grade English class, we didn't talk about what's going on with him and this man he met in the elevator. And they're like, there's little secrets in it. And I've always sort of liked that notion and I don't usually know the secret of the character when I start the book, but then it emerges. Is it that way for you? I think you start with character too.
I do, but I also have those topic crushes, and the crush in it, who is involved in this world.
Yes.
Who of this world is, like, when I first was looking at rodeo, it's like everybody, the bull riders, okay. What about these rodeo clowns over here? What about these bullfighters? Like, isn't there something there maybe? And I think maybe that instead of defaulting to main character energy like a lot of other people do, I think both of us find a fascination, in that other guy, that guy who isn't in the center of the frame.
Yeah, I think it is the sort of, maybe it is again speaks to the writer as voyeur or being on the fringes of things, and somehow we lock in more with that person too. And also it feels like their stories are undertold. It's sort of like what you were saying about noir, the femme fatale, sure she's interesting, the cop's wife's usually not that interesting, but it's like the other woman in the story, that's the one, the diner waitress who seems to know everything, or the female bartender or something, and then you sort of find a whole different way into the story.
Like the female cabbie.
Yes, the female cabbie.
The female
it's like
cabbie.
if you take The Big Sleep, and especially I always think of the Howard Hawks movie, the Bogart movie, and all these women that throw themselves at Philip Marlowe.
Girl.
They're all so interesting.
Bookstore girl.
Yes,
we love bookstore girl.
Yes.
But no, I mean, you're right, and it's a funny thing how you sort of hitch your wagon to person A, and then you think, okay, this is where we're going, and then they're like, wait a minute, and then you find yourself kind of pulled in the opposite direction almost.
Yeah. I think it's just, in part, it makes the writing of it fun, because if it were just like, if you were just writing it as you planned it, say, there would be no excitement in it. But somehow, knowing that something could be revealed to you about this character who seems like such a straight arrow in some ways, or seems so passive, but they're clearly not, or they wouldn't have this other person as their friend. I mean, that's always what I think. Like, there's a kind of, we're drawn to dark, powerful energies in many ways. And certainly we are as people who love to read crime fiction. So I
Absolutely.
think it's the same dynamic.
Yeah, well, we have kind of a long-standing joke about the idea that we wanted to write a story about two strippers who discover the body of a dead cop, a really handsome dead cop, and then they got to solve his murder, right?
Yes.
And, that you take these kind of tropes and you turn them on your head, but, like, where's the movie or the book about the cop's wife?
Yes.
Because shit's going on
Oh, yeah.
there, So, like, there are all these sort of offshoots or other, the path less taken
Yes.
that you can explore.
That's right. We were interested in instead of the femme fatale, the homme fatale, the man, and then instead of the dead girl, it's the dead guy.
Yeah,
and that's the one that's sort of the mystery of it that really becomes about the women. The way the mystery of the dead woman is always really about the detective, and then I do think like turning that stuff over is sort of what we're doing it for. You know?
Yeah, and I think that the notion of projecting onto a blank slate tends to be, I mean, obviously gender is a spectrum, yada, yada,
Yeah.
but it tends to be a more masculine POV.
Yep.
And the idea that a woman would project her fantasy onto a dead guy, it just doesn't have, there's something missing from there, which is really, it's all about you.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do, the dead person's a mirror.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's sort of, when you reverse it, it sort of reveals the kind of weirdness of the dead woman story. Like, why, we don't, this is always beautiful. She's always described in death as being so beautiful. And you realize that it's an engine for the male cop or detective to understand something about himself. And I think that when you start to reverse it, you realize how weird the trope is. And then it becomes an opportunity to do something new and different, I think.
Well, and really, I mean, isn't that what we're all trying to do?
Yeah.
It's easy to fall into the same old. Everything is kind of comfortable. And don't get me wrong, I'm a huge, like, pulp potato chip reader. I love basic, simple,
Yeah, I
easy.
love dead woman books. I mean, I don't know what I'm saying,
Dead
but I
woman books.
read them all the time.
All the time. All the time. Like
But-
popcorn. But sometimes maybe you want to take a different angle on it.
Yes, and I think by turning it just shows the power of the idea that you can keep spinning it and turning it. I mean, earlier today I snuck up to Snoqualmie to see the Twin Peaks, the sites of the Twin Peaks. Which
Tell
is
us
like
a little
the
bit about
ultimate.
that.
It was incredible, and Twin Peaks was a big show for me. It came on when I was in freshman year of college, and it was really revelatory for me. And to me, it was the perfect example. I wouldn't have known it then because I didn't have this sort of, I hadn't read as much as I'd read then, but it's the perfect example. She's this beautiful dead girl who everyone, Dale Cooper is fascinated in but she has secrets and she's so much more complicated a person than you believe. And really she is revealed in all her complexity and beauty as the series goes on. So it just shows you that these tropes, they can feel hackneyed or tired, but they're really not. They're quite powerful if you keep playing with them and reinventing them. And I think that's what we read this stuff for, I think.
Yeah, I mean, you just dig a little bit under the surface and you see what's under there.
Yeah.
I want to take a slight left turn at Albuquerque and maybe talk a little bit about your film and TV experience.
Yeah.
Can you talk at all about SAFE?
Oh, yeah. So, I am developing. I don't know if this is a sort of, you probably have to be deep into film. This was a kind of a obscure film, unless you're a real movie person. But there's a Todd Haynes, sort of famous director now, but one of his first movies is called Safe. And it was really the movie where Julianne Moore became a star from her performance. But it was made in the 90s, and basically it's about this suburban Los Angeles housewife, passive sort of housewife, trophy wife kind of woman, who develops this mysterious environmental illness where chemicals seem to make her sick. And it starts with her buying this enormous sofa for her living room, and they deliver it in the wrong color, and it's so upsetting to her. This is the kind of movie it is. And she starts to get sicker and sicker and sicker, and then, so writing that as a TV series that will carry it further. But it's always been one of my favorite movies. And when you watch that movie now, all the scary environmental stuff has all turned out to be true. And at one point, she starts wearing a mask and carrying an oxygen tank now. And I guess a lot of people started to watch it during the pandemic because it started to feel like it spoke to, this mysterious illness that we can't wrap around our minds around. But when it first came out, everyone thought she was just a crazy woman. So I was sort of interested in the way the culture kind of, unfortunately, caught up with that movie. And now it feels like it speaks to much larger issues, especially in the era of social media and everything else that's contagious about our world. So,
yeah, absolutely. And you had some of your projects that got kind of hung up in the strike, didn't you?
Yes, that was one of them. And I'm also doing a couple projects with the screenwriter Scott Frank, whose new show, for those of you who love crime series, Monsieur Spade, which is that show about, yes. So I'm working with him on an adaptation of Nabokov's Laughter in the Dark. So he famously wrote Lolita. This is a sort of noir novel set in Germany in the early 30s. It's a love triangle. So we're writing that for a feature, and then we're adapting Dashiell Hammett's Red Harvest for a TV series. So those have all been slowed down for the strike, and now as we anticipate the second strike, which is coming this year, where the crew goes on strike, we're trying to fit everything in. So it's the business, but I grew up loving movies as we both did, and so it has been a fun side venture to get to write for TV and film a bit.
Well, and I mean, I think that Dare Me is just, if you haven't seen this series, you need to, because that struck me so powerfully, the fact that this is the POV that we're seeing of the women themselves. Because if you say, you go into Hollywood room and you pitch, yeah, I'm going to do a show about, cheerleaders and they're going to be competing against each other. Oh, yeah, great. A lot of upskirt shots. And they'll be real sweaty and like, oh, this is Susie. She came to borrow my sneakers. We're showering together, soaping up. But you made the viewer feel so a part of that POV of those girls. I think all the time about that scene with Beth where she's dancing on the table.
Yeah.
And you had a female cinematographer, didn't you?
We did, and there are not that many. There are more now, but that has historically been a male job, because they can't carry the camera. Women can't carry the camera or
Petite
whatever.
problems.
but we did, and we really wanted it for all the young girls. It sat on a cheerleading squad, and the actresses they were mostly not teenagers. They were in their early 20s, but it's a very intimate show. There's a lot of intimacy between the young women, and we just knew they'd feel more comfortable with a woman, and the woman, our cinematographer was incredible, and she would really make them feel so comfortable, and it really made it just a great experience. But it did feel like, it was so hard. That book came out in 2012. First, it was going to be a feature movie. And then it was going to be with Natalie Portman was going to be the coach, and then it was going to be Jennifer Aniston, and then it moved to TV, and then HBO bought it, and every time the question was, well, who's going to be watching a show about teenage girls? Which seems crazy now, but this was the world just 10 years ago. No grown up would watch a show about teenage girls. That was the sort of what man would watch?
Well,
they did say that. They did say that. We got it so much. And there's a really kind of love triangle between three women in it, and that was sort of mystifying to a lot of executives. They kept saying, can't we put a boy in here to be a love interest? It's like they didn't understand that there already was a love triangle in it. But everything caught up with it, and by the time it ended up, and now on Netflix, I still get social media messages every day from people, girls discovering it in Portugal and emailing me. There's something so nice about having a global reach of something like that for it. But it was a long battle, and you really do realize, publishing has its challenges, but when you work on in movies and TV, it's so expensive, so getting them to say yes to anything means you're default asking them to give you can I have another $1 million, So you do feel sort of ridiculous, and you have to kind of forget as a people-pleasing Midwestern girl, to say, you do have to kind of fight for this stuff, to say, we need another football game, this football game was the big thing. It's about cheerleaders. You need to give us money to have a football game, or we can't have a show about cheerleaders, but you have to kind of fight for it. Whereas we're dumping millions into some of these more high concept shows. So it's a lot about that.
For men.
It really was a sort of exercise in how hard it is to get anything made, much less something that you believe in, and to sort of fight for as few compromises as possible. And it was exhausting. I aged about 10 years working on that show.
That's show running. But I mean, don't you feel that collaborative nature of making a show, as opposed to writers, we're loners.
Yes.
We're
freaks.
A loner, a rebel, Dottie. We're on our own, and you get that freedom.
Yeah.
You do anything you want, but not only do you have to justify the money, but you got to get everybody else's input and get.
Yeah.
Dad's got a barn, let's put on a show.
Right.
Everybody's got to be in their place.
Yeah, and that actually, other than getting the money and justifying it to the suits, the collaborative element was the best part of it. These wildly talented, production designer, costume designer, these actors that bring so much to the parts, that you have these directors for each episode, and they have all these ideas about how to tell some of the story. And then you have, something like a camera move that the DP can come up with, and a thing an actor can do. You can throw out 2 pages of dialogue because you don't need it, because they've figured out a way to convey that feeling just by pushing the camera in and the actress's face, And so there was something so thrilling about having everybody. We had a production designer who was so talented, and there's an apartment where a crime occurs in the story, and he said, well, what does the apartment look like? And he wanted to know what I pictured it in my head, and he had me draw it out. And then he made it. That was the set. I walked onto the set, and it was like the picture in my brain had come to life. And then you see what artists they are, and you feel so lucky, because we just write snappy dialogue, and they're making this whole thing come together. So
I'll tell you, as a New Yorker, born and raised, that was one of the most amazing things about The Deuce, was the apartments.
Oh my gosh, yes.
You want to tell us a little bit about working on that?
Yes, The Deuce was one of the most intimidating experiences of my life, because it was Lisa Lutz, who is at the conference too, and is an incredible writer. She and I were the women that were hired to work on The Deuce in the writers' room, and it was David Simon, George Pelecanos, and Richard Price. And walking in that room that first day, I had to walk around the block 4 times before I had the courage to go in and walk into that writers' room, because they're all my writing heroes. Richard Price, I mean, come on. But they were great. But it was, it's about the 70s, the birth of the porn industry in New York and Times Square in the 70s. So it was intense subject matter. And because it's about the porn industry, Lisa and I both felt that, and we know that's why they hired us. This is really important to protect the female characters in the story, and that things would be told from their point of view, and things that only for the most part, often women would know about these situations. So it did feel like we also had a really important thing we had to do. We had to really fight for this. Not that there was fights, but I guess we just had to say it, and it did tell you about the importance of diversity in writers' rooms, because if no one's in there to say the thing, it's not that someone's trying to erase experiences of someone, but if no one's in the room to say, I don't think a woman would be thinking about that, I think she'd be thinking about this, and you sort of, so that kind of stuff was a big part of it. But that really beautifully made show. It's HBO money, so it's like real money, and to see that come to life was like a glorious thing. I mean, it was just like walking into a time machine to 70s New York, even as sticky 70s, as sticky as 70s New York.
I'll tell you a fun, because that's my neighborhood. I grew up in that neighborhood, and there was almost a little bit of an uncanny valley feeling in the exteriors, because it's like, wow, that looks exactly like 46th Street between 9th and 10th, but not.
Yes,
because it isn't.
Right.
So it just gives you that, like, this is familiar, but it isn't. And it was a little creepy. But the interiors, all those apartments, were just like, I have been in that apartment.
Yeah,
and
it was in I remember we shot a scene in one of the episodes I wrote on, and it was supposed to be this Italian social club, and we shot it in what was once Italian social club, but is now this bar I really love, Capri Lounge in Greenpoint, Brooklyn, and some of the actors, this is New York, so these are New York actors. They've all been on Law & Order, and they were all in The Sopranos. And these actors I definitely knew from The Sopranos, and definitely 2 of the 4 of them also knew people in organized crime. and we were like killing time between shots, and they like, come over and sit with us. And I'm talking to them, and I'm sitting with these guys, and I literally feel like I have walked into The Sopranos, and I'm like, and it was this most surreal, because everything around looked like this Italian social club from the 70s, and everything felt like slightly dangerous. And I mean, that's the kind of magic that I know that we both fell in love with movies that's set in that world, and there is something kind of giddy about getting that experience.
Absolutely. Well, I think we got about 10 minutes left. Yeah. So,
That's a question.
What are you reading now? You got any recs? Who's like young and upcoming that's knocking you out these days?
Oh my gosh! I mean, it's been a really, I think, exciting few years for crime fiction. I mean, I know one young writer I love who has her new book comes out at the end of the month is Kelly Garrett. If any of you have not read her, I think she's an amazing new writer. Yeah, and that's the one I'm reading now. The one
funny.
forthcoming.
Gritty,
Yes,
like
and they're gritty
element.
and they're real, and and they feel so vibrant. I think that's been one of the exciting parts, is having all these new voices finally enter the arena, and I think it feels like a good moment in crime fiction to me for that reason, and one that gets me excited about what's to come, I mean, it's a good question about what comes next in the crime fiction world, but I think I've never been more excited about it, because it feels like there's just more room for more experiences. I mean, we've all seen Sean Cosby's great books that have basically busted open, because there's going to be like 10 great crime writers that come in after him, because he's just a brilliant writer, and a total mensch in the crime field too. And I think that's the best part of the crime fiction world. I think we all know is how supportive everyone is of one another, and there's not that competitive spirit. And I think you sort of see that increasingly by writers helping other writers, and there's room for everybody.
But in the like, so goes the macro, so goes the micro.
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of ways, I think some of the pushback against women's rights, bodily autonomy, and the pushback against who are these whippersnappers that are not, old white guys with, a fedora.
Yeah.
And that having that pushback against queer writers, marginalized writers, all different types of writers, it almost feels like there's a parallel track going. We're getting a pushback in the culture generally.
Yeah.
So we're seeing it in our little world doubly so.
Yeah. I mean, it's, it always, I mean, in the end, we're always, the publishing is always sort of reflecting the tensions in the culture. And I think we're seeing it there, we're certainly seeing it there too. But I think the readership is always growing, and I think you sort of, in the end, the readers speak with their dollars, and the real battle, I think, is making sure that there's marketing money put behind particularly writers of color, queer writers of different experience, because often the editor loves the book, they want to publish it, the publisher's behind it, but they actually needs to be, to break out a writer, they got to put the money behind.
We've already got a gay writer. Sorry.
Yeah, right. We have one.
We got a black writer. We're good.
Yeah.
We got that one.
Every
time.
Or they're pushing more, but they're not putting those dollars to get, I mean, this is sort of the dirty secrets of publishing, is like to get on that table at Barnes & Noble, to get on that Amazon landing page, to get good, you have to actually pay for it. And I think it's why we all love indie bookstores, because they're pure of heart, and they're and have had a great boom in the last few years. But they got to put their money where their mouth is, and that's
the McDonaldization of publishing, in that you want the widest possible audience, and so you're not going to take a chance on something that hasn't already proven that it's going to work. And then even then,
it's short-sighted, though, because I do think the audience is there. I think it's been proven, and I do think there's a kind of laziness to some. I mean, some writers I love, but legacy writers who've been publishing for 40 years, and they're proven, and so that it's just it's the safer bet. And I think taking more chances is what we want. But I think also the rise of smaller presses has been exciting. I think that's another area of growth. We've especially seen it on the literary side, but I think we're going to see it on the crime side more now too. And I'm hopeful for all that. There's so many ways for this stuff to work, and there's not, I mean, it's so, now that there's the, the big 7, now there's big 5, but it's not really 5 publishers, as we all know. And antitrust, we all know how that goes, but like it's increasingly, becoming like smaller, so I think it creates more opportunities for smaller publishers to emerge.
Well, and I mean, I think that I would like to believe that all of us are readers first and writers second, right? And I think that people fall into this widget notion, where a book is a widget and how many units, are being sold, and it's just all bean counters. And, this is one of the reasons why I don't want to get into AI here now with 5 minutes left. But
no.
One of the reasons why you want a real story told by a real person is because you're not counting beans. You want to feel what someone else feels. You want to share. And that's what has always been so remarkable about what you do, is that you share these hidden, secret feelings with the reader, and that means so much more than counting beans.
I think that is why we want to enter different experiences, and I think it's one of the reasons it's been so great post-pandemic to see the great turnout at conferences like this one, to see people coming out, and to see, I know book events have been really back, and I think we want to talk about this stuff with each other too. There's a community element that's so big. It's not just about us, our solitary.
Oh my God, what did you buy? What did you get in the book bag?
I always come away from events like these with like a stack of books and 20 recommendations, and it is one of the conferences where like more people are, we're not talking about publishing contracts and stuff like that. We're talking about what we're reading, what we're excited about, and I think that's the real deal, and that's not going away. And AI or whatever can't replace any of that, nor do we want it to.
Yeah, I remember seeing a kid at the LA Festival of Books once. This is a young writer, and he's got a big shopping bag full of his own books, and he's hustling around, and I'm like, so, what'd you get? What'd you get? What'd you buy? And I look and it's all his books. He's like, oh, I don't have time to read. I'm too busy promoting my book.
Is that someone you don't even want to, that tells you everything you need to know
about
that.
That's all I need to know.
Yeah.
That's all I need to know, because, that love of reading, it shows in the writing, and you can't fake that.
No, nor should anyone go into publishing for the money. So you gotta go. It's gotta be for love. It's gotta be for love.
Yeah, you hear the one about the blonde starlet who was so dumb that she fucked the writer? like we just, why else are we doing this?
Yes, that's
It's
right.
got to be for the love of everything about that ability to communicate.
Yeah.
That's what matters.
Yeah.
So we're just about out of time. I got one last question for you. So I heard this apocryphal story, may or may not be true, that you carry your own martini glass when you travel. Is this a lie?
Wow, I so want to confirm that, but that's absolutely. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Wow. Will I not burnish the legend? Yes.
Right.
Yes. Oh wait, yes, no, right. That was a particular evening.
Okay, we got to hear this. We've only got a minute, but give us
I
a
don't know
cliff
if any of
notes.
you have spent any time in Mississippi, but there's, you bring your, okay, there's the what do they call them there? There's a different term, but it's different, it's a regional term in different places where you bring sometimes it's called a roadie, right? Where you bring your drink for the trip to the place to drink. Yes. And,
Like that's classy. Like a stem glass is your go cup.
I know, no. I mean, it is a slightly exaggerated story, but there's the Oxford, Mississippi. If any of you have ever been there, it's a place that it definitely encourages eccentric writers. It's the home of William Faulkner. It's there's some history there, and a martini glass is not great to carry with you. It's
doesn't
just got
seem
a
that
stem.
way.
I think you're asking for trouble. I would say a highball glass would be the way I would go. I think a highball glass is good with a nice, good, solid bottom. That's going to get you where you need to go.
That's a good recommendation to end on. So we're going to take
Thank you
off.
so much, Christa. Thank you.
Megan Abbott, ladies and gentlemen. So come on, if you want to continue to ask about mysterious beverages in Oxford, come and see us in the book room.